In the vast emptiness of space, humanity had always believed we would find others like us, brave, adventurous, ready to face any challenge. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. When the Galactic Council finally made contact with Earth in 2157, we discovered something that shook us to our core. We were the galaxy's oddballs, the weird ones, the ones who actually ran toward danger instead of away from it. I remember the day Captain Sarah Chen first told us about the Regellian distress signal. Our ship, the TNS Dauntless, was on a routine patrol near the outer rim when the emergency broadcast cut through our usual communications chatter. The alien vessel was caught in the gravitational pull of a collapsed star, their engines failing and their crew frozen in terror. They're just sitting there. Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from his station, his brow furrowed in confusion. All life signs are stable, but they're completely unresponsive to our hails. That's when we learned about the freeze response, not just a human reaction to fear, but apparently the universal response of every other sentient species we'd encountered. When faced with real danger, they simply stopped. Their advanced technology, their centuries of space travel, their supposed superiority, none of it mattered when survival instincts kicked in. The Council had classified humans as primitive because we lacked their technological advancement, but they had never encountered a species that could push through paralyzing fear, that could function under extreme pressure, that could improvise when everything went wrong. They had never met anyone like us. "We're going in," Captain Chen announced, her voice steady as she activated the ship-wide comm, prepped the emergency suits and tether lines. "We've got 20 minutes before that ship reaches the point of no return." The rescue op was considered suicide by Council standards. No other species would even attempt it. The gravitational forces could tear our ship apart, the radiation could fry our systems, and one wrong move would send us plummeting into the same trap as the Regellian vessel. But we weren't like the others. We were human. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as our crew prepared for the rescue. Engineers calculated trajectories on the fly, medical teams prepped for possible casualties, and the rescue team suited up. I watched from my station as Sarah went through her pre-mission checklist, her movements precise and focused. "You know," she said, checking the seals on her suit, "back on Earth, they used to call people like us crazy. Now the whole galaxy calls us heroes." She smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "Let's show them why." That day changed everything, not just for the Regellians we saved, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. We weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced, but we were the ones who acted when others couldn't. We were the ones who ran toward the explosions, who dove into the fire, who faced the darkness head-on. As I watch the rescue footage now, years later, I still get chills. The Dauntless hanging precariously in space, our rescue team crossing the void between ships, the look of absolute awe on the Regellians' faces when they realized what we were doing. It was the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the species they had dismissed as cowardly humans were the only ones brave enough to step up. This is our story, the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became our greatest strength, and it was just the beginning. The Regellian rescue was just the first ripple in what would become a tidal wave of change across the galaxy. Within weeks, the footage from our helmet cams had spread through every corner of Council space. Species that had looked down on us for centuries were suddenly seeing humans in a new light, but not everyone was happy about it. "They're calling it reckless endangerment," Chief Engineer Wilson said during our post-mission briefing, tossing a data pad onto the conference table. The Council's preliminary report glowed with angry red marks. Apparently, saving lives is against protocol if it involves any personal risk. Captain Chen leaned back in her chair, that familiar half-smile playing across her face, the same smile she'd worn when we pulled off the impossible rescue. "Tell that to the Regellian families who still have their loved ones because of our reckless endangerment." But the Council's reaction highlighted a deeper problem. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of perfect safety, of calculated risks, and guaranteed outcomes. The idea that someone would willingly put themselves in danger to help others didn't just frighten them. It threatened their entire worldview. The aftermath of the rescue revealed something even more startling. The Regellian ship's logs showed that their emergency protocols had worked exactly as designed. When faced with danger, their biology triggered a state of suspended animation, allowing them to survive until help arrived. The problem was, in their million years of space travel, no one had ever actually come to help before. How many? I remember asking during the briefing. How many ships are out there? Just waiting? The silence that followed was deafening. We all knew what it meant. How many vessels had we passed by in our early days of space travel, thinking they were abandoned? How many crews were still out there, frozen in time, waiting for someone brave enough to save them? The TNS Dauntless was quickly retasked. We weren't just a patrol ship anymore. We became the first dedicated deep space rescue vessel. Our crew underwent specialized training, our systems were upgraded, and we started actively searching for those emergency beacons that other species had learned to ignore. But with each rescue came more questions. The galaxy was changing, and not everyone was comfortable with the shift in power dynamics. We started hearing whispers about closed-door council meetings, about new regulations being drafted to control human interference in natural selection processes. Lieutenant Rodriguez summed it up perfectly during one of our late-night watch shifts. They're not afraid of us being reckless anymore. They're afraid of us making them look in the mirror. And he was right. Every human rescue mission forced the Council species to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their advanced technology and evolved biology hadn't made them better. In some ways, it had made them worse. They had lost something fundamental, the drive to help others even at personal cost. The tension came to a head 3 months after the Regellian rescue. We picked up another distress signal, but this one was different. It was coming from a Council diplomatic vessel, and it was caught in something far worse than a gravitational well. As Captain Chen called us to our stations, none of us knew we were about to face a choice that would change the course of human history forever. The galaxy was about to learn that being human meant more than just being brave. Sometimes, it meant being the monsters that others needed us to be. The Council diplomatic vessel's distress signal led us into the Vega Nebula, a region of space that ships normally avoided, not because of natural hazards, but because of something far worse, the swarm. Even the bravest human captains respected the danger they represented, a hive-mind species that consumed everything in their path. The Council had written off this entire sector centuries ago, establishing strict quarantine zones to contain the threat. Multiple biosignatures aboard the diplomatic vessel. Rodriguez reported, his voice tense. They're alive, but in their typical frozen state. And there's something else. He adjusted his sensors, face paling. Swarm signatures, all around them. But they're not attacking. They're waiting. Captain Chen stood at the viewport, her reflection ghosted against the backdrop of swirling purple gases and distant stars. It's a trap, she said quietly. Has to be. The swarm's never shown this kind of restraint before. The pieces started falling into place. The Council vessel's presence in a restricted zone. The swarm's unusual behavior. The complete lack of response from Council command when we reported our rescue attempt. Someone had orchestrated this entire situation. They're testing us, Chief Wilson growled, voicing what we were all thinking. The Council. They want to see what we'll do when faced with an impossible choice. The choice was clear. We could follow Council protocol, retreat to a safe distance, and let the diplomats face their fate. Or we could attempt a rescue that would mean putting our ship, our crew, and potentially all of humanity at risk if we failed. If we succeeded, we prove ourselves heroes once again. If we failed, we give the Council all the justification they needed to restrict human involvement in space rescue operations. Captain Chen called an all-hands meeting in the cargo bay, the only space large enough to hold our entire crew. Standing on a maintenance platform, she laid out the situation. No grand speeches, no appeals to heroism, just facts, risks, and consequences. Command has officially ordered us to stand down, she concluded. They're probably monitoring us right now, waiting to see if humans can follow orders when they really matter. She paused, looking each crew member in the eye. This isn't just about saving those diplomats anymore. This is about who we are, and what we're willing to risk to do what's right. The silence that followed felt heavier than a neutron star. We all knew the stakes. Violating a direct order meant court-martial at best, the end of humanity's independence at worst. Following it meant betraying everything we stood for. Rodriguez stood first. My great-grandfather was a firefighter in Old Mexico City, he said. He used to tell me, the day we stop running into the fire is the day we stop being human. I say we run. One by one, others stood. Wilson, the medical team, the engineers. Not a single person remained seated. Not because we were fearless. We were terrified. But that's what made it matter. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and moving forward anyway. Captain Chen nodded, that familiar half-smile returning. Plot a course through the nebula. All hands to emergency stations. And someone wake up our AI systems. We're going to need every advantage we can get. As we moved into position, the swarm began to shift. Millions of biomechanical entities, each the size of a small shuttle, forming patterns we'd never seen before. They weren't just waiting anymore. They were organizing. That's when our long-range sensors picked up something else. More council ships, hiding just outside the nebula, watching, waiting to see what the primitive humans would do when faced with their worst nightmare. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest nightmare wasn't the monsters lurking in the dark. It was the thought of becoming the kind of beings who would abandon others to those monsters. Just as we were about to engage our rescue protocols, our ship's AI flagged something in the diplomatic vessel's transmission that everyone had missed. Hidden beneath layers of standard distress coding was a second signal, encrypted in an old Earth format that the Council wouldn't think to scan for. It's coming from inside the diplomatic vessel, our AI specialist confirmed, her fingers flying across the holographic display. Someone on that ship managed to stay conscious long enough to send us a warning. She looked up, her expression grim. The swarm isn't the real threat here. The ship is carrying classified Council research. They were experimenting with swarm biotechnology. Captain Chen's face hardened as the implications sank in. The Council hadn't just set a trap for us. They'd been playing a much longer game. Those frozen diplomats weren't victims. They were test subjects. The Council had been trying to replicate the swarm's hive mind capabilities, seeking a way to cure what they saw as humanity's greatest flaw, our individuality. They're scared of us, Wilson said softly, staring at the sensor readings. Not because we're dangerous, but because we're proving them wrong. Every time we succeed where they freeze, every time we choose action over inaction, we show that their whole society is built on a lie. The swarm's unusual behavior suddenly made sense. The biotechnology experiments had created a connection, not enough for control, but enough for influence. The Council ships weren't just watching to see if we would attempt the rescue. They were waiting to see if their modified swarm could infect human crews with the same freeze response that paralyzed their own species. If that biotech gets off that ship, if they succeed in weaponizing it, Rodriguez didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what it meant. The end of human independence, the end of our ability to choose courage over fear. Captain Chen called up the ship's schematics on the main display. We're not letting that happen. New plan. We're not just going to rescue those diplomats. We're going to expose what the Council's been doing out here. But as we prepared to move in, the swarm's pattern suddenly shifted. The diplomatic vessel's engines fired up. Impossible, given the frozen state of its crew. Unless, they're not frozen anymore, our medical officer shouted, checking the biosignatures. The diplomats, their readings are changing. Whatever the Council did to them, it's spreading. The swarm isn't waiting to attack. It's waiting for them to transform. The Council ships began moving into attack positions, dropping their pretense of observation. They'd show no mercy now that we discovered their secret. Humanity's greatest test wasn't going to be about bravery in the face of danger. It was going to be about retaining our humanity when faced with the temptation to become something more than human. Captain Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers. We're not running, and we're not freezing, but we're also not letting them turn us into them. She paused, her hand hovering over the tactical controls. Sometimes being human means knowing which battles not to fight and which ones you have to fight differently. As the transformed diplomats began broadcasting a signal that made our crew's heads spin and our instincts scream to freeze, we realized the true horror of what the Council had created. They hadn't just found a way to stop humans from acting. They'd found a way to turn our own bodies against us. But they'd forgotten something crucial about human nature. Sometimes our greatest moments of courage come not from charging forward, but from finding another way. Captain Chen's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the signal that was trying to force us to freeze, we embraced it, but on our own terms. Our ship's ad began broadcasting our own signal, carrying something the Council had never considered: human laughter. The oldest human medicine, our medical officer explained as she helped calibrate the transmission. Laughter triggers the release of chemicals that counteract fear responses. They tried to use our bodies against us. Let's use them right back. The effect was immediate and stunning. As our broadcast cut through the swarm's signal, crew members who had been fighting the urge to freeze suddenly found themselves grinning, then chuckling, then roaring with laughter. The absurdity of it all, the Council's fear, their desperate attempts to control us, the sheer ridiculousness of trying to force humanity to stop being human. It all came pouring out in waves of unstoppable mirth. But the real surprise came when the signal reached the diplomatic vessel. The transformed diplomats, caught between their new swarm programming and their original natures, began to react. Their biosignatures fluctuated wildly as our very human response infected their carefully engineered systems. "They're fighting it," Rodriguez called out, monitoring the readings. "The laughter. It's disrupting the swarm's hive mind connection. You can't maintain perfect control when you're laughing. It's too individual." The Council ships opened fire, but their shots went wild. Their crews, exposed to our broadcast, were struggling with something they'd never experienced: the complete breakdown of their rigid control. Some were laughing. Some were crying. Some were doing both at once. In the midst of this chaos, the swarm itself began to change. The biomechanical entities, linked to both the transformed diplomats and their original hive mind, started moving in erratic patterns. The Council's attempt to merge their technology with the swarm had created an unexpected vulnerability, one that human emotion could exploit. They didn't just want to stop us from being brave, Captain Chen realized, watching the swarm's disarray. They wanted to stop us from feeling altogether, but they forgot that our feelings, all of them, are what make us strong. What happened next would be debated in council chambers for decades to come. The transformed diplomats, caught in a feedback loop between swarm programming and human emotion, began broadcasting their own signal, carrying with it everything the council had tried to hide: every experiment, every manipulation, every fear-driven attempt to control the uncontrollable nature of life itself. The swarm, its hive mind overwhelmed by this flood of pure, unfiltered emotion, did something unprecedented. It retreated, taking the infected diplomatic vessel with it, not in fear, but in what almost seemed like respect, as if it had encountered something more alien, more powerful than itself: the chaotic, beautiful, unpredictable nature of human feeling. As the council ships fell back, their crews still struggling with their first taste of uncontrolled emotion in generations, Captain Chen sent one final transmission. Not a message of victory or defiance, but simply the sound of her crew laughing together in the face of what should have been certain death. But here's the real twist, the part that would change the galaxy forever. Among the laughter coming from the council ships, we heard something new, not the forced, frightened sounds of beings experiencing emotion for the first time, but genuine, heartfelt laughter. Hidden among their crews were others like us, beings who had been hiding their emotions, their courage, their humanity. We hadn't just exposed the council's plans or defeated their weapon. We had shown everyone watching that being human isn't about the species you're born into. It's about choosing to feel, to act, to live fully despite your fears. The stars seemed a little brighter as we set course for home, knowing that somewhere out there, the sound of laughter was spreading through the galaxy, awakening something that had been sleeping far too long. In the months that followed the Vega Nebula incident, the galaxy changed in ways no one could have predicted. The council tried to suppress what had happened, of course, but you can't contain laughter any more than you can contain starlight. The truth spread from ship to ship, colony to colony, world to world. The TNS Dauntless became something of a legend, but not for the reasons we expected. It wasn't our bravery in facing the swarm that captured imaginations across the galaxy. It was the revelation that courage could take many forms, sometimes as simple as allowing yourself to feel, to laugh, to be imperfectly alive. They're calling it the Great Awakening. Captain Chen told us during our final crew meeting. She just returned from Earth, where she testified before a joint Human Council committee. All across council space, people are remembering who they used to be, who they can be again. The changes came slowly at first. Council ships started responding to distress calls they would have ignored before. Alien crews began showing emotions openly, sharing jokes, telling stories. The rigid protocols that had governed their society for millennia began to crack, allowing something warmer and more human to grow in the spaces between. The swarm, too, had been transformed by its encounter with us. The diplomatic vessel it had taken was found 6 months later, drifting at the edge of known space. Its crew was alive, neither frozen nor transformed, but changed in a profound way. They spoke of their time with the swarm not with terror, but with wonder. The hive mind had tasted human emotion and found it not chaotic, but beautiful, a new form of unity based not on control, but on shared feeling. Lieutenant Rodriguez led the team that studied the recovered vessel's logs. The swarm wasn't our enemy, he reported, and maybe it never was. We just never tried to make it laugh before. The council itself underwent the most dramatic transformation. As more of its members awakened to their suppressed emotions, the old guard's grip on power began to fade. New leaders emerged, not just humans, but beings from every species who had kept their capacity for feeling alive through generations of enforced stoicism. Chief Wilson retired from active service, but not before helping to establish a new type of emergency response network. We're calling it the Humanity Protocol. She told us at her farewell party, not because it's just for humans, but because it's about responding to crises the human way, with heart, with courage, and sometimes with laughter. Looking back now, years later, I understand what my crew achieved that day in the nebula. We didn't just save ourselves or expose a conspiracy. We reminded an entire galaxy that being truly advanced isn't about eliminating risk or controlling fear. It's about embracing the full spectrum of what it means to be alive. The Council still exists, but it's different now. In the chamber where they once debated ways to control and contain humanity's influence, representatives from all species gathered to share stories, songs, and yes, laughter. The frozen silence that had gripped their civilization for so long has thawed, replaced by something warmer and more alive. As for the TNS Dauntless, she's still out there, answering distress calls. But these days, she's not alone. Vessels from every species join in rescue missions, each bringing their own unique approach to courage. And if you listen carefully to ship transmissions late at night, you might hear something that would have been impossible just a few years ago, the sound of human and alien crews laughing together among the stars. Because that's the real truth we discovered. In the end, being human isn't about the shape of your body or the planet you call home. It's about choosing, again and again, to feel deeply, to act bravely, and to face the unknown with an open heart, and sometimes with a smile.